There's a pattern hiding in plain sight, and once you see it, you'll never unsee it. The most confidently wrong people in any room aren't confused. They're not lost, they're certain. And that certainty, that's not intelligence. That's a cognitive trap that the human brain falls into. And it falls hard. See, real intelligence comes with something uncomfortable attached to it: doubt. The moment a person stops questioning themselves, stops feeling that friction of maybe I'm wrong, that's not growth. That's the brain shutting down and calling it wisdom. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on why the least competent people walk the tallest, speak the loudest, and convince entire rooms, while the sharpest minds in history died questioning everything they knew. There's something deeply uncomfortable about this truth, and your brain is already trying to reject it. The people around you who speak the loudest, who volunteer first, who never seem to second guess a single word coming out of their mouth, they are not the most capable people in the room, they just think they are. And that distinction is everything. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger ran a series of experiments at Cornell University that would permanently change the way we understand human self-perception. They tested people on logic, grammar, and humor, measuring both their actual performance and their estimated performance. What they found wasn't just surprising, it was disturbing. The people who scored in the bottom quarter consistently believed they had performed above average. Not slightly above, significantly above. They had no ability to recognize their own incompetence, because recognizing incompetence requires the very skills they lacked. Read that again slowly. To know that you don't know something, you first have to know enough to recognize the gap. And when that knowledge doesn't exist, the gap becomes invisible. The brain doesn't sit in silence when it lacks information. It fills the space. It manufactures confidence. It builds a story that feels completely real, completely justified, and completely wrong. This is not a flaw in broken people. This is a feature of the human brain. Every single person walking this earth is running this program to some degree. The question is not whether you're affected, you are. The question is how deeply and in which areas of your life this trap has already cost you without you ever noticing. Think about the last time someone gave you advice with absolute conviction. No hesitation, no caveats, no acknowledgement that they could be wrong. Maybe it was a business decision, maybe it was medical, maybe it was about your relationships. That certainty felt trustworthy, didn't it? That's the trap working exactly as designed. The brain reads confidence as credibility. Evolution wired us to follow the most certain voice in the group because hesitation once meant danger. But the environment has changed. The jungle has been replaced by boardrooms and social media feeds, and that same ancient wiring is now being exploited daily. Here's where it gets even more layered. The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just affect the incompetent. It has a mirror image that most people never talk about. Highly skilled, deeply competent individuals consistently underestimate their own ability. They assume that if something feels easy to them, it must feel easy to everyone. They discount their own expertise because they're close enough to the subject to see all the things they still don't know. So while the least capable person in the room raises their hand first, the most capable person stays quiet, wondering if they've truly earned the right to speak. This creates a social dynamic that is nothing short of dangerous. Organizations get led by the loudest, not the wisest. Decisions get made by those with the most conviction, not the most competence. And the people most qualified to redirect the ship stay in the background, second-guessing themselves while someone with a fraction of their understanding steers everyone toward the rocks with a smile. Now you might be sitting here thinking, well, I'm self-aware enough to know when I don't know something. And that thought alone should give you pause, because that's exactly what someone inside the trap would think. Self-awareness is not a switch you flip once. It is a discipline. It is a daily practice of interrogating your own certainty, of asking yourself not just what you believe, but why you believe it, and what it would take to prove you wrong. The most dangerous version of this trap is not found in the obvious fool who talks too much at dinner parties. It's found in the professional who has just enough knowledge to sound credible, just enough experience to feel qualified, and just enough blind spots to be catastrophically wrong at the exact moment it matters most. that person doesn't know they're in the trap. That's the entire point of the trap. There is a kind of intelligence that never gets heard. It sits in the back of the room. It second guesses itself before it even forms a sentence. It watches someone less qualified take the stage, make the call, get the credit, and it says nothing. Not because it has nothing to offer, but because it knows too much to feel certain. And in a world that rewards certainty over correctness, that silence is costing us everything. Watch any group dynamic long enough, and you will see this pattern emerge without fail. The person who knows the least talks the most. The person who understands the most waits the longest. And by the time the quiet one finally decides they might have something worth saying, the room has already moved on, already committed to the loud person's version of reality. This is not random. This is not coincidence. This is a deeply predictable consequence of how intelligence actually develops inside the human mind. When a person first encounters a subject, any subject, the initial phase feels surprisingly comfortable. They pick up the basics quickly. The surface level makes sense. There are no complications yet because they haven't gone deep enough to find them. This is the stage where confidence peaks. This is the stage where the Dunning-Kruger trap locks in. But for the person who keeps going, who pushes past the surface, who reads deeper, who challenges their own understanding, something shifts. The more they learn, the more they discover how much they don't know. Every answer opens 3 new questions. Every layer of understanding reveals a layer beneath it that they hadn't accounted for. This is the moment intelligence starts to feel like a burden, because now the world is no longer simple. Now every question carries weight. Now every confident statement they might make comes with an internal disclaimer, but there are exceptions, but the data isn't complete, but I could be wrong. And while that internal process is the mark of a genuinely sophisticated mind, it looks from the outside like hesitation. It looks like weakness. It looks like someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, which is the most brutal irony intelligence ever produces. Bertrand Russell captured this decades ago when he observed that the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always certain of themselves, while wiser people are so full of doubts. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing a structural feature of how knowledge works. Certainty shrinks as understanding grows. And in a social environment that treats certainty as the primary signal of competence, the smartest people are perpetually disadvantaged by the very depth of their own thinking. This plays out in every domain you can name. In medicine, the doctor who has seen the most cases is often the most cautious about diagnosis, because they've seen how many times the obvious answer turned out to be wrong. In business, the most experienced operators are often the most reluctant to make sweeping predictions, because they've watched enough cycles to know how fast conditions change. In leadership, the most capable people are frequently the most uncomfortable with unchecked authority, because they understand the limits of any single perspective. And in every one of these cases, their hesitation gets misread as lack of confidence, lack of vision, lack of drive. Meanwhile, the person next to them, armed with enthusiasm, a polished pitch, and just enough knowledge to sound convincing, walks into the room like they've already won. And often they do win, not because they're right, but because the room responds to energy, to decisiveness, to the performance of certainty. The brain processes confidence as a social signal of trustworthiness. We are wired to follow the person who seems most sure, and that wiring does not automatically update when the sure person is wrong. There is also something else happening beneath the surface of this silence that rarely gets examined. Intelligent people often hold back not just because they doubt themselves, but because they can anticipate the counterarguments. Before they've even spoken, they've already played out 3 versions of how the conversation could go wrong. They've already identified the weakness in their own position. They've already imagined the skeptical question they won't have a perfect answer to, so they stay quiet, not from ignorance, but from a kind of intellectual empathy that the overconfident person never develops, because the overconfident person never thinks that far ahead. The human brain is not a truth-seeking machine. It never was. It is a survival machine, and survival, for most of human history, had nothing to do with being correct. It had everything to do with being fast, being consistent, and belonging to a group. The brain that questioned everything got eaten. The brain that acted on instinct, committed to a direction, and stayed loyal to the tribe. That brain survived. And that brain is the one sitting inside your skull right now, making decisions in a world it was never designed for. Confirmation bias is not a quirk. It is not a bad habit you can fix with a motivational quote. It is a deeply embedded cognitive architecture that runs underneath every thought you believe is rational, every conclusion you believe is objective, and every opinion you believe you arrived at through careful consideration. The mechanism is simple and devastating. The brain actively seeks information that confirms what it already believes and actively discounts, ignores, or attacks information that challenges it. Not occasionally, constantly, every single day, without your permission, without your awareness, and without any regard for whether the belief being protected is actually true. Here is what makes this particularly dangerous in the context of intelligence and self-perception. When a person holds a belief about their own competence, when they have decided, consciously or not, that they are smart, capable, and correct, the confirmation bias engine turns fully toward protecting that identity. Every piece of evidence that supports their self-image gets amplified. Every compliment lands with weight. Every small success becomes proof of their larger narrative. And every challenge, every contradiction, every piece of evidence that might suggest they are wrong gets filtered, reframed, or rejected entirely. Not through deliberate dishonesty, through a process so automatic they never even see it happening. This is how intelligent-sounding people hold profoundly wrong beliefs for decades without ever feeling the friction of being wrong. They are not stupid. They are not lying. They are running a program that the human brain runs in every single person, but they have never been handed the tools to interrupt it. And so the program runs unchecked. The beliefs compound, the blind spots deepen, and the confidence grows. Not because the evidence supports it, but because the brain has been quietly curating a reality that does. Now layer on top of this the modern echo chamber. And you have one of the most powerful reinforcement systems ever constructed. Social media algorithms are not neutral platforms. They are engagement machines, and engagement is driven by emotional resonance, not accuracy. Content that confirms your existing beliefs triggers dopamine. Content that challenges your beliefs triggers cortisol. The platform registers which one keeps you scrolling and delivers more of it. Within weeks, your entire information environment has been quietly reshaped around the contours of what you already think. You are no longer encountering a world. You are encountering a mirror. And the reflection looks exactly like everything you hoped was true. The social dimension of this goes even deeper. Human beings are tribal by design. Belonging to a group historically meant safety, resources, and survival. Challenging the beliefs of your group meant rejection, and rejection once meant death. That threat is no longer physical, but the brain hasn't received the update. When someone challenges a belief that is tied to your group identity, your political tribe, your professional community, your cultural circle, the brain processes it as a threat to survival. The rational mind goes offline. The defensive mind takes over. And suddenly a conversation about facts becomes a battle about identity, about loyalty, about who you are and which side you're on. This is why expertise doesn't automatically win arguments. This is why data doesn't automatically change minds. This is why you can show someone evidence that directly contradicts their position and watch them walk away more convinced than before. A phenomenon researchers call the backfire effect. The brain, when threatened, doesn't update. It doubles down. It finds new reasons to believe what it already believed. It reframes the contradicting evidence as biased, as agenda-driven, as part of a system designed to deceive. And it does all of this while the person genuinely believes they are thinking clearly, objectively, and rationally. The people most trapped inside echo chambers are almost never aware they are inside one. That is the defining feature of the trap. From the inside, it doesn't feel like a chamber. It feels like clarity. It feels like finally being surrounded by people who see the world as it actually is, while everyone outside the bubble is confused, manipulated, or simply not paying attention. Arrogance is not a personality defect. It is a learned behavior that got rewarded. And anything the human brain gets rewarded for, it repeats, it refines. It doubles down on until the behavior becomes identity, until the pattern becomes so deeply wired that the person cannot separate who they are from how they perform. What we call arrogance is not a character flaw that some people are born with and others are spared. It is an output. It is the end result of a social feedback system that has been running, largely unexamined, since the first time that person opened their mouth and the room responded positively to their confidence rather than their correctness. Think about how early this starts. A child raises their hand in class, not because they know the answer, but because they are bold enough to guess. The teacher calls on them. The room looks at them. For one moment, every eye is forward and every ear is open. That is a neurological event. The brain registers attention as reward. It registers the feeling of being seen, being heard, being centered. And it files that experience under "do this again." It doesn't matter whether the answer was right. What mattered in that moment was the response. And if boldness consistently produces attention, the brain begins to optimize for boldness, not for accuracy. This loop runs through childhood, through adolescence, through every social and professional environment a person enters. The loudest voice in the group gets heard first. The most confident pitch in the room gets funded first. The person who speaks without hesitation gets promoted first, because organizations like brains are wired to read certainty as competence. Nobody gets celebrated in a meeting for saying, "I'm not sure, I'd need more data." But someone who stands up, speaks with conviction, and delivers a clear direction, even a wrong one, gets remembered, gets followed, gets rewarded. And every reward teaches the brain to perform that behavior again, louder, and with less restraint than the time before. Over time, this creates what can only be described as an arrogance algorithm, a self-reinforcing cycle where confidence produces social reward produces more confidence, and the original question of whether the confidence was ever justified gets buried so deep beneath layers of reinforcement that it becomes completely inaccessible. The person is no longer performing confidence as a strategy. They have become it. The behavior has fused with identity. And now any challenge to their certainty is not processed as feedback. It is processed as an attack on who they fundamentally are. This is where arrogance becomes truly dangerous, not just to the individual, but to every person in their orbit. Because a person whose confidence is tied to their identity cannot afford to be wrong. Being wrong doesn't just mean updating a belief. It means dismantling a self-image that has been constructed and reinforced over years or decades. The psychological cost of that is enormous, and the brain will do almost anything to avoid paying it. It will dismiss critics. It will reframe failures. It will surround itself with people who validate rather than challenge. It will interpret every contradiction as jealousy, as ignorance, as the predictable response of smaller minds who simply cannot keep up. What makes this cycle almost impossible to break from the outside is that arrogance is socially contagious. When one person performs unearned confidence and receives reward for it, the people around them observe the transaction. The brain is a pattern recognition machine, and the pattern it recognizes here is clear. Certainty gets results. Doubt gets overlooked. And so the behavior spreads. Entire teams, entire organizations, entire industries develop cultures where admitting uncertainty is quietly punished and projecting confidence is quietly celebrated, regardless of whether that confidence is grounded in anything real. The most insidious version of the arrogance algorithm is the one that has learned to disguise itself. Raw, unfiltered arrogance is easy to spot and easy to dismiss, but the sophisticated version wraps itself in the language of passion, of vision, of leadership. It learned early that naked arrogance repels, so it put on a suit. It added charisma. It borrowed the vocabulary of humility without ever absorbing the substance of it. It says things like, "I'm always learning," while never actually changing. It performs openness while remaining completely closed. And because the performance is convincing, the people around it drop their guard, and the algorithm continues running, collecting rewards, reinforcing itself, growing stronger with every cycle it completes without consequence. There is a difference between knowing something and understanding it, and that difference is one of the most consequential gaps in human cognition, because from the inside they feel identical. The person who has memorized a set of facts experiences the same internal sensation of knowing as the person who has spent years developing a deep, tested, nuanced understanding of a subject. The feeling is the same, the confidence is the same, but the depth, the actual structural integrity of what they know is completely different. And under pressure, under complexity, under real-world conditions where the variables don't cooperate and the situation doesn't follow the script, that difference becomes everything. The human brain is, at its core, a pattern recognition engine. This is one of its greatest strengths and one of its most treacherous liabilities. From the moment you are born, your brain is scanning the environment, identifying recurring patterns and building shortcuts, cognitive frameworks that allow you to process reality faster without having to analyze everything from scratch every single time. This is efficient. This is necessary. Without it, you could not function. But the same mechanism that allows you to read a face, navigate a familiar street, or finish someone's sentence is also the mechanism that convinces you that you understand something far more deeply than you actually do. When you encounter information that fits a pattern your brain already recognizes, it generates a feeling of familiarity that the brain interprets as comprehension. You hear a concept, it rhymes with something you already know, and your brain files it under understood without ever actually testing whether the understanding is real. This is called the illusion of explanatory depth, and it is one of the most well-documented and least discussed phenomena in cognitive psychology. People consistently believe they can explain how things work in far more detail than they actually can. Ask someone how a zipper works. Ask them how a toilet flushes. Ask them how their own economic or political beliefs would function at scale. Watch what happens the moment they have to move from recognition to explanation, from I know this to let me show you that I know this. The gap that opens in that moment is the gap between pattern recognition and genuine understanding. And it is in that gap that the illusion of intelligence lives. The person who has consumed enormous amounts of surface-level information, podcasts, articles, social media threads, highlight reel books, accumulates a vast library of patterns. They have heard the vocabulary. They have absorbed the frameworks. They can reference the right names, quote the right studies, deploy the right terminology in conversation. And because language is the primary currency of perceived intelligence, they pass. They sound knowledgeable. They feel knowledgeable. And the social environment, which has no efficient mechanism for distinguishing depth from breadth, treats them as though they are. This is why the information age, rather than producing a more intellectually humble population, has in many ways produced the opposite. Access to information has never been greater. And yet the gap between surface knowledge and structural understanding has never been more exploited. It is now possible to spend 30 minutes consuming content about quantum physics, behavioral economics, geopolitical strategy, and neuroscience, and walk into a room feeling genuinely equipped to hold court on all four. The brain has collected enough patterns to generate confident-sounding language, but confident-sounding language is not understanding. It is a performance of understanding, and it is a performance the brain delivers to its own owner, just as convincingly as it delivers it to everyone else. What separates real pattern recognition from the illusion of knowledge is the ability to transfer. Genuine understanding is not confined to the specific examples through which it was learned. It can be applied to new situations, to edge cases, to problems that don't look like the original template. It can survive questioning. It can be taken apart and reassembled. It can identify its own boundaries, the exact point at which the knowledge ends and uncertainty begins. The illusion of knowledge cannot do any of these things. It can only perform within the boundaries of the patterns it has collected. The moment the conversation moves beyond those boundaries, the moment the questions get specific, the moment the real-world application gets messy, the illusion begins to fracture. The most telling sign of genuine intelligence is not fluency. It is the ability to say clearly, specifically, and without defensiveness, exactly where your understanding stops. To draw a precise line between what you know and what you don't, to hold complexity without collapsing it into a premature answer. That capacity is rare. It is uncomfortable to develop. It requires a person to regularly sit with the feeling of not knowing, which is one of the most psychologically uncomfortable states the human brain can occupy. Because the brain was not built for uncertainty, it was built for resolution, and so it resolves quickly, automatically, and often incorrectly, and then presents that resolution to you as knowledge, as insight, as understanding. And you believe it, because it feels exactly like the real thing. Everything covered before this point has been a diagnosis, a breakdown of the mechanisms, the patterns, the social systems, and the cognitive architecture that allow unearned confidence to thrive while genuine intelligence stays quiet. But a diagnosis without direction is just a more sophisticated way of feeling stuck. The real question, the one that matters, the one that separates the people who walk out of this room changed from the people who walk out entertained, is not whether this trap exists. It does. It is not whether you have been affected by it. You have. The only question worth asking now is whether you are willing to do what it actually takes to break the cycle. And the first thing you need to understand about breaking it is that it will not feel like growth. It will feel like loss. The moment you begin developing genuine self-awareness, real, structural, uncomfortable self-awareness, the first thing it dismantles is the version of yourself you have been most comfortable being, the confident one, the one who always had an answer, the one who never needed to say, I don't know, because not knowing felt like weakness, and weakness felt like danger. That version of you was built by years of social reinforcement, by a feedback system that rewarded performance over accuracy, and by a brain that was doing exactly what brains are designed to do, protect the identity it spent so long constructing. Asking that brain to voluntarily dismantle the structure it built is not a small request. It is one of the most psychologically demanding things a human being can undertake. But here is what that process actually looks like in practice, because theory without application is just another layer of surface knowledge. The first and most foundational shift is developing what researchers call intellectual humility. Not performed humility, not the kind where you say, oh, I could be wrong, while your body language and tone make absolutely clear that you believe you are not. Genuine intellectual humility is a cognitive posture that has to be practiced deliberately, repeatedly, and especially in the moments when your ego is most loudly telling you it is unnecessary. It means building the habit of asking yourself, before you speak, before you decide, before you commit, not just what do I believe, but why do I believe it? What evidence would change my mind, and what am I most likely wrong about right now?